Thanks, Mr. Chair, and good morning. I'm Pinch Manager in Compliance and Performance Monitoring. And for this item at the beginning, I just like to thank many of you, I think, for your participation in the sixth cycle RHNA process. As all of us know, that the housing crisis is a collective problem that requires collective solutions. So this time that at SCAG, we are also making effort to really make the RHNA process as much a collective process as possible. And I'm really glad to report to you that just for the past couple of months, I think we have 4 events. I think each one has been participated by about 250 people. I think certainly the public hearing, we have 250 people participated. We have received over 250 comments, and we did a preview 4 weeks ago, and we have about 250 people participated, including about 180 on the web. And then just last Monday, the RHNA subcommittee meeting, we also had 180 people participated through web, and plus I think 70, 80 people, I think, participating at here or the video conferencing office. So those 4 events, we have over 200 people. That certainly has been unprecedented. I think today, even for this very technical matter, I believe right now we have over 100 people on the web, right? So I think we are already have maybe like 150 people, I think, participating in this event. So let me just do. So for this item, I think it's on the technical clarification as well as a tool demo. Let me just mention at the beginning, very quickly, I think in terms of where we are in the process, I think certainly right now we are October 17, so we are in the middle of developing the draft RHNA methodology, and we had that was approved by RHNA subcommittee last Monday, and we had the CHD meeting coming up next Monday. And very quickly, as we reflect back that for the past almost 5 or 6 months on the methodology discussions, it really has been predominantly focusing on the methodological as well as policy questions, as we have encouraged people to focus on. And that includes comparing the different options, and as well as, I think, to look at the merits of the various factors used in the methodology. However, I think now we have one staff recommended methodology. So there is a need, I think, to also focus on the technical as well as the data related details. So that's the objective for this session. And then for that, I think we have invited not just all the TWG members, but all the local jurisdictions, as well as all stakeholders, interested parties. And so the objective, I think, first is to provide a demo of the tool. And many people use the tool just to find out, I think, the RHNA, the estimated allocation for the respective jurisdictions. But the tool really includes a wealth of data, and really want to thank Dr. Kevin King, I think, to almost like a volunteer, I think, to put this tool together. I think it's really a great asset. And that actually can address many of your questions, as well as many of the questions you will be asked. So we would like to provide a demo on that. And then the second is provide additional background and clarification of the 2 factors. One is the job accessibility, the other is transit accessibility. Those are the 2 used, I think, to allocate. Right now, it's half of the existing need, I think, or over 30% of the total need. And with that, we are also providing additional technical documentation that I think for those two factors, that includes, I think, 3 short pieces of narratives, and they all have been posted online last night. And so for the entire RHNA process, if there are only 2 things you will need to know, one is the web page, and you will get everything about RHNA, I think almost everything from that page. But you would like to receive the information timely, that you would definitely want to join the RHNA email list. So just send us email us, I think, to the housing@scag.ca.gov, and I think you will be put on the email list. So I think before we probably start the great shakeout, just want to remind everybody, I think in terms of the objectives of RHNA, I think to certainly increase the housing supply as well as the varieties of housing types, and then promote infill as well as the efficient development patterns, and then to address the job housing, balanced job housing fit, and then also to address the social equity. So I think with that, I think that's basically is the general background I would like to provide. And then we have the 3 topics we will be addressing. And after each topic, we will have maybe 2 to 3 minutes to address clarification questions. And for those who are using the web, I think please email your questions to housing@scag.ca.gov. And we might not be able to respond to all of your questions, but we will try to respond to you, I think, after the meeting, and also likely to include those in a updated FAQ, which is currently also posted on the RHNA page.
So I'm Kevin Kane. I'm going to go over the RHNA calculator tool, and I'm going to try to share my screen right now. So I believe should be able to see that if it's set up right. Now, Ping mentioned there's additionally a kind of a wealth of information that you can get on this in addition to all the input data and all of the calculations in the form of a formula. So it's available here right on the RHNA website. And it's called the Draft RHNA Methodology Estimate Tool here. You can just click and have that download. And the tabs of this are locked just so that we don't have tons of versions floating around on there. But that being said, you can very easily export the data for your own use just by doing a copy and paste. I'm just going to kind of go through really over here just a few examples of this. This is the landing page you have. You're able to select a city. You can see the total regional housing need. On the left-hand pane, you can see all of the statistics that go into a RHNA calculation. You can compare your city, its values are here, to the percentile of where it is region-wide. So you can see forecasted household growth and then how that compares to jurisdictions across the region. Same for all the other variables that have a percentile that can be associated with them. There's also, and on the right-hand side here, you can see the specific RHNA allocation calculation that follows the written methodology, projected need, factors related to existing need, and then finally the breakdown by income category. There's also a helpful metadata tab here. If you navigate down, that provides an overview, a brief description of the data sources, and a description of all the variable names. In addition to estimates, household growth estimates on tribal land. This is a small amount that only affects a handful of local jurisdictions, which you can see here. So we just included it here. It's already built in to the household numbers in the data itself, but it's broken out here if you need to see that. The meat of this is actually in this third tab here, RHNA Data. If you do need to, as I mentioned, this is locked. So if I try to type anything here, it's locked. But if you want to, you can simply copy this into a new workbook, and you'll be able to, once you put a filter on, use this in the exact same way that we do internally to kind of look at and compare jurisdictions with a little bit more ease. So I'm just going to run through a couple of cities of examples that kind of illustrate some of the inputs to the RHNA methodology, so that you can kind of start to get a better sense of how all of these cogs interact with each other to yield a RHNA number. So I'm going to take a look at the city of Burbank right here to start off with. The city of Burbank, for the RHNA period, which is 2021 to 2029, based on SCAG's growth forecast, which went through the bottom-up local input and envisioning process, the city of Burbank has an estimated 2025 household growth. It's 59% renters. This is from American Community Survey, 5-year estimates from 2017. This is used in a small portion in order to make a vacancy adjustment. Vacancy tends to be a little bit higher in renter units. So if your existing housing stock skews a little bit renter, the vacancy adjustment to the projected need is going to be a little bit higher. You can see how many housing units were lost to demolition but not replaced. This is starting point for this is California State Department of Finance data, followed up by a survey that was conducted by SCAG earlier this year, and that data you can see that here for the city of Burbank. In addition, we put here the household growth from 2020 to 2045. Basically, this is essentially the SCAG forecast that went through the local input process, but adjusted upwards by about 4%. The reason being that the total regional number, the regional determination, is just slightly higher, about 4% higher than SCAG's growth forecast up to 2045. So this number here reflects fairly accurately, but plus a few percentage points, the forecasted household growth for 2020 all the way out to 2045, which is the horizon year of Connect SoCal, our regional transportation plan. We're going to go into detail next about the job accessibility measure, but this measure indicates here the city of Burbank from the median or kind of midpoint transportation analysis zone, or TAZ, in Burbank. In the future, on the future transportation network, you can reach about 14% of the region's jobs. If that's weighted by population, you get this figure. This is actually the share of the region's job accessibility in the measure that I'll describe next. About 82% of the population of the city of Burbank in 2045 is going to be within a high-quality transit area. This represents about just under 1% of the region's HQTA population. And the final input here is this is data from the California Tax Credit Allocation Committee, which we're using here to satisfy objective number 5 of RHNA, which is to affirmatively further fair housing. So basically, we're able to use that data to segment the population of each local jurisdiction into low, medium, and high, into 5 total categories. And we've got a couple of them here that we actually use for the calculation. So none of the city of Burbank is in low or very low resource tracts. 46.5% are in very high resource tracts. So because it's not on the very low end or the very high end, Burbank gets the kind of the baseline social equity adjustment of 150%. This gets adjusted up to 180% if you have especially high amounts of low resource population or high resource population by this measure. And you can see the actual breakdown for the city of Burbank here on the right-hand side. Their forecasted household growth is about 2,000 units. We adjust this upward by 5% for 5% for renter households, 1.5% for owner households, so it goes up a little bit. There is no replacement need based on the survey data I described earlier for the city of Burbank. So you can see that number here, about 2,100 as the total projected need. And then here are the inputs to existing housing need. As I mentioned before, the draft recommended methodology includes in order to satisfy existing need, we look to future projected growth. That's about 50%. So for the city of Burbank, that's 1,970. Existing need due to job accessibility. That's this job accessibility measure here. It's about 1,210. Existing need due to population, HQTA population share. Burbank is fairly high compared to the region in terms of its population within high quality transit. So there's a positive figure here. And this factor here, which we're calling here a net residual factor. So in order to ensure that the lowest resource jurisdictions, often what we noticed in kind of examining the urban geography of the region for crafting some of this is that a lot of the jurisdictions with particularly high job accessibility and transit accessibility are particularly lower resourced areas, a lot kind of in Los Angeles County, a lot kind of toward the LA Orange County line in particular stood out. And in order to ensure that they're not receiving an extremely high RHNA allocation, especially of the kind of the more above moderate income units, it's a little bit of a gentrification stopgap. We reallocate those across the region to other jurisdictions which do not have an especially high amount of very low resource population based on the transit and job accessibility. So Burbank ends up with a little bit of that, what we're calling a residual factor here, to calculate the total existing need. You can,
Kevin,
yes.
you may ask a question now or when you're done.
What do you think, Bing? Just can we, okay, I'll be done in a couple of minutes. Okay. Yep. So that's the overall kind of breakdown here. I do want to draw your attention to this RHNA Data tab where you can see all of these. If you export it into your own file here, you can actually filter and sort and take a look at how particular cities might compare against each other. The way we've organized this is that the green highlighted headers are actual data inputs. You can learn about them in the metadata tab. And then the orange headers are the actual calculations based on it. So for example, here we have population in an HQTA. Here is the city's share of population in an HQTA. You can see the formula for that there. And the regional share of the HQTA population. The bottom line is that anything that ends up being part of a RHNA calculation, based on the share of HQTA pop, the job access share, sums to 1 or 100% across all jurisdictions. So that would be an example of this column here. So I want to illustrate a couple of other points that you can see back on this main output tab. If I look at a couple of other jurisdictions, if I look at Linwood is an example of a jurisdiction. You can see the same forecasted household growth, renter share. You can see it's fairly high on the job accessibility measure, fairly high on the high quality transit measure, but it has almost all of its population in low or very low resource tracts. As a result, its social equity adjustment will be increased a little bit from 150% to 180%. You can also see here on the right-hand side that because of that essentially stopgap measure, it has a negative number here in this net residual factor. So essentially we're capping Linwood and other jurisdictions which have this feature in order, and that ends up reducing their existing need and therefore their total RHNA. You can also see here that a particularly high share, in fact, over half of Linwood's are above moderate income, and that's again kind of reflecting that it tends to skew lower income. Last city I want to point out here is the city of Palm Desert. Palm Desert is an example of a jurisdiction. You can see they have a fairly high amount of forecasted household growth for the RHNA period, but also the broader period until 2045. And they've got fairly low job accessibility relative to the region. So from the city of Palm Desert, you can only get to about 2.5% of the region's jobs within a half hour. And while they do have some high quality transit, it's right around kind of middle of the pack. They also have a fairly high share of population in very high resource tracts. And as a result of that, their social equity adjustment does get upped a little bit as well. You can see here, though, in this net residual factor, they get a 0. And in fact, they have a very small share of their existing need is due to the job accessibility and a high quality transit area population. Most of it is in the household growth, anticipated household growth categories. So that's kind of an overall view of the RHNA calculator. Apologies. Margaret had a question, and then I can probably take a few more, I imagine.
Great. Okay. Now, HQTA and social equity.
Can you please turn the microphone on?
Sorry. Okay. So with HQTA and social equity, let's start with social equity, 170%. 170%, then, and you talked about with Burbank, you had 0 that were in the low and very low, and then you had a number like close to 50% that was in a moderate or high income. So given that, then how do you come up with the percentage for social equity? And I know there has to be a formula, but basically bottom line is if you have more people in a moderate to high income, then you have a greater chance of having a high social equity adjustment? And do you ever have a negative social equity adjustment, or does it just get as low as 0 and you don't have anything like that?
I guess the bottom line is we have essentially so the concept of the social equity adjustment is the core of it is how does the income distribution in your jurisdiction compare to the income distribution of the county? If you have higher income relative to the county, a higher number on a social equity adjustment, and that's a policy decision, 110, 120, 150, 200%, what have you, then a higher number would mean that you get a higher share of, if you're above your county, you're going to get a much higher share of the lower income units assigned to you. If you're below your county, you're going to get a much higher share of the higher income units assigned to you. Now, when we were reviewing this is the practice from last time, was to use a social equity adjustment, this whole concept like this. We were, there's this new 5th goal of RHNA to affirmatively further fair housing. HCD kind of informally made it quite clear that using just income is not necessarily enough in their view to satisfy that we need to augment that by other indicators, which take into account environmental quality, school quality, those types of resources, so to speak. So we kept the overall structure of this intact. But what we did is for the jurisdictions which have particularly high or particularly low resource score, which you can see in the calculator here, the baseline social equity adjustment, which we're setting at 150%, that can go up to 160, 170, 180. So in a sense, it does go below 0 because the very high would get this and the very low would get this. It affects about 30 or so jurisdictions on the high end and about 30 or so jurisdictions on the low end. And actually in the calculator itself, if I'm still sharing my screen, I can't quite tell necessarily, but it's quite a bit to the right, starting columns AQ through columns AV, where you can see which jurisdictions get extra. That's in fact in column AW. So it's the very high and the very low are getting a little bit extra social equity adjustment, basically because of that same concept of redistributing, but we're adding a couple of other, this other indicator.
And is that kind of arbitrary?
Well, it's an attempt to use the same concept of the social equity adjustment, but add some other indicators to it, such as the environmental quality, such as the school quality. There's some components of accessibility built into there as well. Again, it's an externally derived index, but it by and large, I wouldn't say it's arbitrary. But it's kind of what we crafted in order to take that into account.
Okay, then let's go to the HQTA. So say we have really good transit in our area. How does this affect the score?
So transit isn't, so this resource level score, which is there, it's in column D28, D30. Where I've pulled out the high and low on this output tab. You can see it in columns AW-ish on the RHNA Data tab itself. I can't recall, there are, what about a dozen or so inputs to that, mostly related to school quality, environmental quality. I can't recall if there's anything, I don't believe there's anything specifically transit related as an input to that, right? So the HQTA share is separate. Jung and Philip are going to discuss that in a moment. But basically, if you have a higher share of your jurisdiction's 2045 population in an HQTA, then that's an input to existing need. On the right-hand side there, 25% of the existing need would be allocated on that basis. So in this Burbank example here, they have, almost 83% of their city is in an HQTA. That's cell E24 here. And in fact, they have quite a bit of, Burbank's fairly sizable jurisdiction. In fact, 0.93% of the entire region's population that has high quality transit nearby is in Burbank. So that would be the direct input to this 25% of the existing need, which is allocated based on HQTA population.
And so what you're saying then is you have this HQTA, so you have, say Burbank here, so approximately 83% are located near high quality transit. So how does that impact the overall score?
That's not, I mean, that's not impacting the score, the score.
Numbers, so
yeah.
to speak.
Yeah. You know, that's exactly in here, you know, a fairly high share of the region's HQTA population, this 0.93%. They are going to get 0.93% of the whole region's amount that is allocated based on HQTA population, which is it's roughly 200,000 or so region wide. So that's what this 1,945 additional units is. That's because of the fairly high amount of HQTA pop in Burbank. Jung and Philip are going to go into a little more detail about the HQTA calculation in particular. I want to see if there are any other kind of questions about the calculator or the data displayed or how to use it or anything like that. I just wanted to draw attention to the fact that all the data are there. This is cognitively sometimes you know, a good way to go through it as well, in addition to this metadata information.
Kevin Gale Shiomoto, law representing City of Mission Viejo. You mentioned early on in the introduction of the calculator that there was some 2 or 3% adjustment. Can you go over that again? I think I might have missed what the adjustment was in relation to.
Yes, definitely. That's this double asterisk here that you see in cell D20. I'm sorry, not D20, single asterisk in cell D18. My apologies. You know, so essentially the SCAG integrated growth forecast used for RHNA, RTP, SCS, et cetera, has household growth region-wide from 2020 to 2045 of about 1.29 million. The HCD regional determination came in at 1.34 million. So what we've reflected here in the calculator, and this is kind of a useful way to kind of understand, you know, the RHNA number relative to each local jurisdiction's growth vision as part of the growth forecast, is this measure here. Now, for Burbank, that number is 6,100. Burbank's growth forecast would be about 4% below that. What we're displaying here is their growth forecast augmented by about that 4% difference between our growth forecast and the total regional determination that we've received from HCD. Great, thanks. And then,
okay, before I think Ki-Hong will continue, right? Before Dr. Ki-Hong Kim come to talk about the job accessibility, I just want to mention two things very quick. First is the PowerPoint, I think, for this session will be posted on the RHNA webpage, right, I think this afternoon. And as well as the video recording of this session. So we will probably not include the one that when you were all like hiding, I think for, I think unknown reasons. So we will not include that. So that's the first. And second is just for those who may not know is we did receive the final regional determination 2 days ago. So that's 1.34 million, which is almost the same as the original one. It's I believe it's 2,900 fuel. So with that, I think Ki-Hong will talk about the job accessibility.
Hi everyone, my name is Ki-Hong Kim. I'm a transportation modeler at SCAG. I'm going to talk about TAG level job accessibility measure. And after that, Kevin will continue to talk about how we use TAG level job accessibility for RHNA. So we define TAG level job accessibility as the percentage of regional job that can be reached within 30 minutes by single occupancy vehicle from each TAG. For this measure, we use 30-minute drive-alone commute for several reasons. First, we expect SOV is still dominant commute mode. Second, statewide average travel time to work is 28.8 minutes for one-way trip. Also, we have been using 30-minute drive-alone commute standard since 1998 RTP for SCAG planning purposes, including environmental justice analysis. So for this measure, we rely on data generated from our SCAG regional travel demand model for 2020 draft RTP 2045 plan, including total employment by TAZ, TAZ to TAZ travel times by single occupancy vehicle during AM peak hours, 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. We used second tier of TAZ, which contains 11,267 zones. In the table, as you can see, a second tier of TAZ is similar to census block group. So once data are ready, we can calculate TAZ level job accessibility measure for each origin TAZ. First, we identify destination TAZ where AM peak hour SOV travel time is less than or equal to 30 minutes. And then we add all jobs within the accessible destination TAZ and divide by the regional total jobs. Here is an example. In our model, we generate so-called highway scheme. Based on specific planning model and predicted travel demand, which is very large matrix that provide different types of impedance for each of origin destination pair zone, including travel times and cost and distance and a combination thereof. Also, we distinguish this Hughes matrix by travel mode, including driver alone, couple, and couple 3+, and by time period, including AM peak hour, midday, PM peak hour, evening, night. In this screen, each cell represents travel time. Each cell represents network-based congested travel time by single occupancy vehicle during AM peak hours. This map shows different travel time by SOV during AM peak from specific TAZ to each of all destination zone. In the middle, I'm not sure if you can see. In the middle, there is a pink TAZ, which is origin TAZ that I live in. The light green zones tell shorter travel time, while the dark green zone tells longer travel times. In this map, blue area show all destination TAZ that can be reached within 30 minutes by driving alone. In this blue area, we identified 991 zone. So here is the calculation. First, we add all jobs in the 991 destination TAZ, which is about 0.9 million. And we divide it by regional total job, which is about 10 million. So the TAZ level job accessibility for this specific TAZ is 9.39%. Yeah, this is all I have.
So why don't I'll thank you, Ki-hong. I'll take it over from here and demonstrate using the screen share again how we get from this TAZ level measure to a jurisdictional level summary measure, which is used for RHNA. And then after that, I think we can both take questions on the job access measure. So here you can see my screen in ArcGIS, the mapping software. And here we have all 197 local jurisdictions in the SCAG region. Here is the overall map that is found in, that has been found in the agenda packets and that Kihong was referencing. This is a TAZ level, or basically a neighborhood level map of the region. I apologize to representatives here from Big Bear Lake, et cetera. I'm going to zoom into an area that does not include your jurisdiction. So my apologies, just so that you can see the measure at work a little bit more cleanly. And you can clearly see that this puts the higher job accessibility measures at the TAZ level. It's in the core parts of the region, mostly Los Angeles and Orange County, a lot kind of on the, in this central spine. This is where you can access a higher share of the region's jobs in general. Now, RHNA is a policy lever that only, as you've noticed, assigns a jurisdiction level number. So how do we take this, really state of the practice measure of job accessibility across the region, which makes very good intuitive sense into a city level measure? So let's just take a city, for example. I'm going to take a look at Fountain Valley. So if I select Fountain Valley here as the entire boundary of Fountain Valley, zoom in a little bit more perhaps, we can see that it's kind of in the deep red and kind of in the mid red. So some of Fountain Valley is pretty high, but the rest of it's fairly high as well. You can get from most of Fountain Valley to a lot of the higher job concentration type of areas in LA, Orange counties, particularly kind of Irvine to the south, Anaheim, a lot of LA County further to the north. So if I select the TAZs who have their centroid within the city of Fountain Valley, I get these 39 TAZs here. And I can look at these 39 TAZs and the accessibility score for all of them. So the accessibility scores in Fountain Valley range from 19.4% kind of here at the southwest corner. This corner is a little bit further from the 405 freeway. It's a little bit further from kind of the higher concentration of jobs further to the north mostly. The most accessible TAZ in the city of Fountain Valley is here, right on the freeway, right in the northwest corner of the jurisdiction. And from there, you can get to 22.35% of the region's jobs. As a summary measure for RHNA, we take the median TAZ, basically the middle TAZ. We look for something that's kind of a midpoint representation of the travel demand experience, so to speak, in Fountain Valley. And if you go into the RHNA calculator that I showed you, for Fountain Valley, it should show that 20.78% of the region's jobs are accessible in 30 minutes on that measure. So let me give you another example here. Say let's look at a different jurisdiction. Let's look at the city of Eastvale. So if we pan over here to Eastvale, a little bit further inland here, and we do the same procedure whereby we select the tracts whose centers are located in Eastvale. This gives us a good representation of these 15 TAZs. I believe I said tracts, my apologies. And you can see the lowest accessibility TAZ in Eastvale is down here. The highest accessibility TAZ is further north, kind of closer to transportation networks, a little bit closer to some clusters of employment, not only in Riverside, San Bernardino County up here, but also a little bit more accessible to Los Angeles County, which tends to have higher employment density. And the median, the midpoint, is right here. I believe it's 11.4% in Eastvale. Now, this measure works particularly well for small jurisdictions that have 15 or 39 TAZs. But I want to demonstrate what it looks like for a very large jurisdiction like the city of Los Angeles or the unincorporated county areas, and kind of show that it's a fairly good reflection for those as well, just kind of given the urban geography of the area. So if I select the city of Los Angeles, and zoom into its boundaries here, you can see that this city of Los Angeles encompasses an extremely wide range of accessibility, from the very highest around downtown to some of the lowest, in fact, over here toward the western edge of the San Fernando Valley. So if I again select the TAZs that lie within the city of Los Angeles, I get quite a few more, naturally. 1,995, ranging from particularly low, can only access 3% of the region's jobs from here, and And if I could take a sample of the ones that are under about 6%, you can see that this is where job accessibility in the city of Los Angeles is particularly low. But on the other end, you've got TAZs that can access more than 30% of the region's jobs. Those tend to be clustered kind of near downtown. So what we're getting for the city of Los Angeles is the median, the midpoint. I believe in the calculator it's about 19%. So you're reflecting jurisdictions, you're reflecting the kind of the travel experience of kind of this central ring or so here. Not quite the highest, but not quite the lowest, but one that is appropriate jurisdiction-wide. So it's definitely a shift kind of in thinking. You know, previously we've had discussions about jobs housing ratios. This takes it to a different step, because certainly it's not as much about the jobs that are within the boundaries of a local jurisdiction. It's more about the jobs that you can get to from that local jurisdiction, which we feel is an overall better reflection of travel demand and job accessibility and an output from our transportation demand modeling efforts. So that's all I've got here. We have time for a few questions for Ki-Hong and myself.
Okay, several questions. This is Deborah Depp from CDR. The TAZs, Tier 2 TAZs, are used for modeling, understand that, but they don't follow jurisdictional boundaries. Usually they don't. So you're selecting, it's good that you're using a median score, but you're also potentially selecting TAZs that aren't within a jurisdiction by choosing the centroid, because the shapes of the TAZs can be crazy. They're not any type of grid and they don't follow jurisdictional boundaries. So you can actually capture some TAZs that by using the centroid into a jurisdiction or outside of a jurisdiction when it would be more appropriate that it be included in one or the other. So why wasn't the data, is there a way to have the data be modified to be with the city split TAZs, or is it only because it's the TDM model that we can't do that?
Yeah, we spend a lot of time to define each of TAZs based on transportation context.
Right.
Yeah, so we're not gonna change. We don't have plan to change TAZ boundary for now.
Right.
Yeah.
So, right, that's more
Yeah.
probably a question for.
And more, and kind of once, you know, what we're using this, you know, essentially this input for is to get the best reflection of the kind of the average or the midpoint of a travel demand, you know, of job accessibility in a local jurisdiction. So that's why we're using the median. Now, you do mention, and that's, you know, with good point, that TAZs don't necessarily cross, TAZs do often cross jurisdictional boundaries. However, I would counter that with centroid is a fairly good reflection of which TAZ is within. Or nearly within, right. But if it's adjacent to a jurisdictional boundary, it's likely going to have very similar transportation characteristics to the TAZs that are within that jurisdictional boundary. So there are methods like area-weighted interpolation or population-weighted interpolation that can improve upon that a little bit, or, you know, as Ki-Hong mentioned, you know, splitting TAZs by cities is done or can be done sometimes. But for the output measure that we're looking for this, which is a jurisdictional level reflection, that's not necessarily going to be changing things all that much, if at all. So
And
that's why we'd stand by that.
And that's one of the things too, is that we're taking something for a regional transportation plan and travel modeling and looking at future traffic and travel demand and what we need to do to, or what can we do to break the system. And we're taking that information and using it and repurposing it for RHNA accessibility measure. So we're making something fit in the best way we can for RHNA. Whether that's appropriate or not, or how it can be modified, that's a different issue. Going back to the traffic demand and the TAZs as well. So taking a step way back, and even aside from the RHNA, I'm just trying to grasp it in a holistic way where, again, I do data, but I'm not a modeler. So when we take the TAZs and you're looking at the TAZ accessibility for jobs within that TAZ, or the location, the origin, going to the destination of a job in another TAZ, it doesn't have anything to do with space or distance. It has to deal with time, and it has to deal with traveling from a TAZ that can be shaped like a circle to a TAZ that can be shaped like a trapezoid someplace else. And it's the people that are within that TAS traveling to a TAS in another location. So it doesn't matter if the person is on one end of the TAS and you're going to a job on the far end of the TAS, you're calculating everything for within that TAS to a single measurement. Is that correct?
We use network-based congested travel time on the actual street. So travel time from zone to zone means a central connector and then go to highway or freeway, and then exit another centroid. So we calculate based on actual street, not just Euclidean distance from zone to zone. Yeah.
Right. So it's boundaries, it's following connectors because the TASs typically follow streets and arterials. And so if you have a TAS, and forgive me for the folks that are on the phone, but if you have a TAS and the connector is here, all of the traffic is flowing to one point or different nodes along the outside and then traveling along that. So that's just the way the travel demand models work. I understand that. So, but in application and creating the job accessibility score, we have to recognize, now that I understand, I thank you for the explanation of, we're taking these TASs and that information from the tier 2 TAS, 11,000 in the SCAG region. I'm curious, do we have any idea of what the average size in square miles is of a tier 2 TAS? It's just a question that popped into my head right now. I was just curious.
I can check later, but
Okay.
as I said, very similar to census block group in terms of size.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So, okay.
And kind of, I think to your broader question a little bit, yes, this is conceptually different. This is using something from a travel demand model, which is initially developed for the RTP SCS for a different purpose, for a jurisdictional level measure. But I would say we have that strength in-house to be able to develop a particularly effective job accessibility measure across the region that really hasn't been done before. It's much more robust and a better reflection of the job accessibility from a jurisdiction than something like jobs housing ratios, for example, which had been floated and kind of had been discussed before, had been included in a couple of agenda packets. I believe SANDAG is using jobs housing ratios to some extent in their RHNA methodology, but we feel this is overall a much more robust reflection given the urban geography of the area, the fact that there are bedroom communities, the fact that there is commuting across not only jurisdictional lines, but across county lines in the region quite strongly. So we feel this is a particularly robust measure given all those considerations.
I have another question, but I'll let others if they have questions.
I actually have two, one for Kihong and one for Kevin. So Kihong, on the transportation network, I know in the for transit, for HQTA, we're using 2045, I think probably for appropriate reasons, but for the congested conditions, are we using the 2045 network or are we using a baseline network? We're saying we're building these housing over the next 8 years, presumably. So most of those capital improvements probably won't happen until closer to 2045. And are we artificially showing less congestion if we're using 2045 network? So just trying to, what network are we using and just to kind of understand that.
Yeah, we use 2045 plan network.
So like in LA County, if it's a plan network, we're assuming that like in West LA, there could be congestion pricing that would actually have things much faster, much more accessibility than what you would see today.
Yeah, those projects are included in this network.
Okay, Kevin, thanks. Thank you, Kevin. Use the median. Why not like a weighted mean?
Well, we're weighting it afterwards by population size. You can also weight the TASs. The distribution for that, the statistical distribution, looks almost identical upon review. And one of the purposes for using the median is it is a little bit more intuitive to explain, because then you can say that this is, roughly a reflection of, of the travel experience in that local jurisdiction, such and such % of regions jobs. So we analyzed internally a few different alternatives, weighting by households beforehand, weighting by population beforehand at the TAS level. But comparatively across the N of 197 jurisdictions, those were almost identical in terms of the overall outcome. So we elected to go with this one because of that feature being a little bit more intuitive. I've got a couple of really quick questions that came in from email. One of them is, why is the job accessibility based on auto, not all modes? The rationale for that on the RHNA side is that we're including a HQTA-based or transit-based measure in addition to this. And as Ki-Hong mentioned, that is still seen to be probably the dominant commute mode into the future. Why not a jobs housing ratio? That's not necessarily as good of a reflection, we feel, given the urban geography of the region, as I'd mentioned. And why is it based on population instead of acreage? And kind of the rationale for that, both in the job accessibility measure and the transit accessibility measure, which will be described next, is that you're kind of seeing this in terms of who may benefit, who may be the beneficiary of this increased accessibility to jobs or transit. So based on that, we decided to use the population rather than overall acreage, which does have other considerations for sure. Urbanized land use, urbanizable land use, other constrained areas and things like that are avoided when we use population as well. So.
Quick question. So Miles Mitchell, City of Los Angeles. So thank you. I'm not the expert on RHNA or land use. Our planning department is the expert on that. But Kevin, TAS boundaries for the RHNA process and for the SCS. So have the TAS boundaries changed for the 2020 RTP SCS relative to the 2016?
Boundaries exactly the same.
The boundaries are the same?
Yes.
Okay.
From 2016 RTP to 2020 RTP.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So what's the big change again for now? I know we've been talking about that, but boundaries are the same. So what's the big policy input here? You're talking about job accessibility and transit accessibility.
Yeah, I mean, we're essentially using a model output to generate an indicator of job accessibility for use for allocating housing units in RHNA, 25% of the existing need specifically.
Okay.
So it just hasn't been applied for that purpose.
Okay.
There's strong impetus that satisfies the statutory objectives of RHNA quite strongly, and it does a fairly good job of linking kind of the common goals between the RHNA process and the RTP SCS.
Okay, got it. Pretty simple. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Kevin and Ki-Hong. And then I think if we can move on, and then if later we have a little bit time, then I think we can do questions. And so next I will have my colleague Philip Law as well as John So to brief you about the transit accessibility measures.
Good morning, Philip Law, SCAG Manager of Transit Rail. Okay, well, I won't be using that. So I'll be providing a technical methodology overview of how we identified the high quality transit areas. So the high quality transit areas, or HQTAs, are essentially a half-mile buffer around high quality transit corridors and major transit stops. So in your agenda packet for this item, there is the methodology documentation that we developed and vetted through the Regional Transit Technical Advisory Committee. And generally, we use the definitions of high quality transit corridors and major transit stops that are provided in statute through SB 375 and then SB 743. I won't read through them, but there are definitions for both in various places in the Public Resources Code. And using these definitions, we worked with the transit operators on our technical advisory committee. We also consulted with other large MPOs in California, and we spoke with OPR, the Governor's Office of Planning and Research. So we've initially developed a methodology for the 2016 RTP, and we have since updated it as part of the Connect SoCal 2020 RTP development. For existing conditions for Connect SoCal, we use the base year of 2016. And then for future planned high quality transit corridors and major transit stops, we use our 2045 plan network. So just some key characteristics of the methodology: we use stop-based analysis, so the headways are calculated at the stop level. So in order to qualify, for example, as a high quality transit corridor, you have to have 15-minute or better frequency service on a bus route. So looking at the stops on each bus route, we calculate the number of buses, essentially bus trips that come by during the peak period. We use our SCAG model peak period of 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. and 3 p.m. to 7 p.m. to calculate the average frequency. And routes that meet this threshold would therefore qualify as a high quality transit corridor. And briefly, there was a question, I think, online. So if your city doesn't have any 15-minute frequency service, then you don't have a high-quality transit corridor in your jurisdiction. There's some additional nuances and details that I can get into if there are questions about them, or you can feel free to reach out to me afterwards. I'd be happy to answer any of your questions. I do want to mention, and this is something we specifically brought up with OPR, potentially there are high quality transit corridors on freeways where you obviously don't have a stop on the freeway alignment, but OPR did indicate that those under the statutory definition, they still qualify as a high quality transit corridor. Now, there was a question, I believe, in Orange County on the I-5, there's a planned BRT project which would qualify as a high quality transit corridor. But when we define HQTAs, which is the buffer around a corridor, we can modify that. I mean, that's a SCAG creation, right? A high quality transit area. So we can certainly define those as to exclude alignments along the freeway where there are no bus stops and you cannot access the corridor. And Jung, following me, will talk about the changes that will be made to those freeway-related high-quality transit areas. And so I'll just stop there, and I'll take any questions you might have.
Thank you. My name is Sean Scully, Planning Manager with the City of Redondo Beach. We've looked, want to thank everybody, particularly Mayan, for the work she's done, and Ping. We've been in contact regularly, scrubbing the data that we're getting related to this particular topic. And we've worked closely with MTA at where transit, future transit stations would be located. We have different data based on our communications with them for future locations. And then in turn, we've also downloaded the data and gotten the population, or let's say dwelling unit counts within your buffer areas. And they're different from the data fields that are in the appendices. So my question generally is, will we have an opportunity to scrub that data and confer with SCAG on those numbers?
Yes, I think, thank you, Sean. I think we are looking into that. And maybe at this point, I just like to mention is a couple of things. One is all the technical documentation, I think, from this session has been included in the data appendix for the RHNA methodology that has been posted on the RHNA webpage. I would encourage, I think, everyone to review that and then provide us with comments or corrections needed. And certainly the sooner the better, but right now we would like to establish December 11 kind of as the timeline for that. I think for the transit network, there is also another opportunity, I think, during the Connect SoCal review process. That actually, the deadline right now, I think is likely to be on January 24th. But we really hope that, I think, any kind of comments, corrections, I think, could provide to us before that. So I think December 11, that would be the preferable. So I think that's the.
Thank you very much. And just a general comment,
Yeah.
we do agree with the additional factors that have been added with the confirmed methodology, and really think that's a move in the right direction. Thank you.
So with that, I think maybe we can have John to talk about how this would be applied to RHNA first, and then we can take additional questions.
Thanks, Philip and Ping. Good morning. I'm Jung Seo in Research and Analysis Department. So like Philip mentioned, we received comment from local jurisdiction regarding the HQTC located on freeways. So SCAG staff modified our HQTC and HQTA layers based upon the local jurisdiction's comment. And the map you can see now, so this map shows those HQTC lines on the freeways. So there are about 8 or 9 freeway segments in the SCAG region. So those are originally included as a part of the HQTC, high quality transit corridors, but they are located on freeways. So we modified our HQTC and HQTA by removing those freeway HQT sections. And by the way, although we removed those HQTC on freeway lines, we added those bus stops located on the freeway. So this map shows the modified HQTA map. So as you can see, the blue area is the modified HQTA by removing the freeway HQTC and adding those express bus stops located on the freeways. The red area shown in the map are the areas that are removed by this removal of HQTC. Based on our analysis, due to this modification, there are about 4% decrease in HQTA area compared to the original HQTA and the modified HQTA. And some of the area, because HQTA is the half mile from HQTC and major transit stops, although we removed those freeway HQTCs in some areas like central Los Angeles or northern Orange County, the impact of the removal of freeway HQTCs are kind of minimal in those kind of area. Okay, I guess that's it for this.
This is Marnie from OCOG. I have a question on the 5 freeway corridor. That BRT line has not yet even been studied, and there's no information that I've been able to find on traffic on specific station stops for that alignment. So I'm wondering how you picked the stops that are on that corridor shown on the revised map.
So that information came from OCTA. This project, I believe, comes from the adopted LRTP.
I can speak that a little bit. I don't know all the specifics, but yeah, it will be studied, and there may be inline freeway route stops, but it's to be determined. I think SCAG's approach here kind of reflects a good balancing point of including stops which could be reasonable. We don't know exactly where they're going to stand, and this probably reflects our thinking. And kind of laying it out, until we do the study, we don't know exactly where the stops will be and what specific. But when just because you can see the freeway doesn't mean that you have great transit accessibility to it, and I think the approach makes sense.
This is Gail Shiamoto-Lore, representing the City of Mission Viejo. And first of all, I want to thank SCAG staff for looking into this issue. I think this is a more reasonable approach to apply it, knowing that no one's going to cross over 4 lanes of a freeway to hop on a BRT that's running down the line. In looking down at South County, I can confirm that that looks like the Laguna Niguel Mission Viejo Metrolink commuter rail station, which makes total sense. And that it's there existing right now, it's going to be there in the future, and I can see the logic of within a half mile of that stop, including that as a high quality transit area. And I'm assuming on the other ones that if there is a question, we can work with OCTA and yourselves just to confirm, for example, are these existing rail stations, and then these are the stops, or are they new stops that are still to be looked at? I remember, Warren, as we discussed, OCTA is going to look at or conduct a major study in 2020 that further confirms where potential stops might be on this I-5 BRT corridor. So I think it's a moving process, and maybe we can use this time to confirm at least where they are shown right now, and work with you on that.
This is Josh from the regional office in San Bernardino. Same thing with SBCTA. There's a lot of proposed HQTAs included in there. When we were looking at those HQTA lines or the corridors, we weren't anticipating RHNA numbers being assigned to those areas. So if you can work with us on that, because those are proposed and those are not really, we didn't really look at it in that standpoint. So if you can work with us on that, that would be great. Thanks.
Okay, I think with that, we will conclude this item. I would like to thank all my colleagues, as well as I think for your the questions as well as input, and the questions particularly from the web. I think that we have about 130 people on the web. I think really appreciate your participation also. So we will respond to the questions, the remaining questions, and possibly incorporate those as part of the revised FAQ. And lastly, is just like to mention the updated estimate posted last night has already incorporated this revised HQTA approach. So with that, Mr. Chair, I think we completed the item number 1.